Okay. All right. So we are, I know it's felt like this for a while. We're still in the Sabbath controversies. Tonight, we're going to cover the third of the Sabbath controversies. So they happen one right after another. And so I know it's felt like we've been in this for 4 weeks, and we have been in it for 4 weeks, right? And it's the same types of stuff where they have this view of the Sabbath that's not a biblical view. They believe that Israel was created for the Sabbath. They believe that even God himself honors the Sabbath and doesn't work. And they made all of these 1,500 laws about what you could not do on the Sabbath. Otherwise, you would be committing, quote, work. And we looked at some of those things last week with the issue of the grain. And so Christ is he is acting appropriately on the Sabbath. Remember, he healed the man at the pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath on a feast day, because that's what God would do. God would want you to eat because it's a necessity to live and survive, right? And so he's demonstrating God's view, God's laws on how to appropriately honor the Sabbath. And they don't like it because it goes against their laws. And in defending himself for this, particularly with the man that he healed at the pool of Bethesda, remember, in his defense, he said, I'm God. And then last week, he said that he was Lord of the Sabbath. Well, who's Lord of the Sabbath? God. God's the one that created it. So he has repeatedly, in his defense of his actions, shown and demonstrated that he is in fact God. So not only is he breaking their Sabbath laws, not the biblical Sabbath laws, but their Sabbath laws, he's also claiming to be God. And that just is something that they cannot and will not abide by. And so we have our third Sabbath controversy we're going to talk about tonight. And you're going to see that their explicit goal and aim is to kill him, right? And it's been that way actually since the pool of Bethesda experience. But since these things have happened one right after another, in fact, the first and second Sabbath occurrences probably happened on the same Sabbath day. This one, it's not clear if it's still the same Sabbath or perhaps a subsequent one, but they're very closely tied together from a timing perspective. And the result of that is going to be the rejection of him as the Messiah, at least from the religious perspective. The nation itself has not rejected him as of yet. So let's take a look at this third one. This is the healing of the man that has the withered hand. And again, we are here in part 4 with the authority of the king. We've got Messiah's authority to heal. Next week, we will wind up here with the choosing of the 12. So that'll actually complete the 12. Because remember, up to this point, he only has 6. He has 6 disciples, and he's going to add 6 more, including Judas, to his choosing of the 12. And of course, then that will be complete. And then we'll have a few more sections here before we get to the next major portion of his life. Right now, he's demonstrating that he's in fact has the authority to be the king and to be the Messiah. All right. So this particular incident that happened again after the healing of the man by the pool of Bethesda, and then the subsequent issue of him and his disciples walking through the grain field and his disciples eating the grain on the Sabbath, we have the third one of the Sabbath controversies. And let me read from Matthew's account, and then I'll point out those areas where we see some differences between or some additions with Mark and with Luke. So Matthew chapter 12, verse 9 through 14 says this: he went on from there and entered their synagogue. Okay, so remember, this next incident is now going to happen in the synagogue. The first one happened at the pool of Bethesda, which is outside. The first one happened at the pool of Bethesda. The second one happened in a grain field. This one now is going to happen in a synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him? He said to them, which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? of how much more value is a man than a sheep. So is it lawful to do good? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand, and the man stretched it out, and it was restored healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. All right, that's Matthew's account. Now, Mark says this. He actually gives us, there's going to be a little bit of a textual issue we're going to have to resolve here in a moment, right? Because Mark says, but they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at the hardness of their heart. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. So we have here that Jesus not only heals the man, but he is angry at the religious leaders, right? And so his anger, and he's grieved. He's mentally and emotionally distraught about their hardness of heart over what he is going to do. And also, Mark adds that they didn't just go out and conspire against him, but they went out and conspired with the Herodians, which is strange bedfellows, to say the least. Like, you talk about opposite ends of the spectrum, the Pharisees and the Herodians were on opposite ends, and yet they both got together to conspire against Christ right after this incident. So you see the mounting pressure against Christ with the different groups that are part of the Jewish society. Now, Luke says on another Sabbath. So this tends to make us believe here that this is not the same Sabbath that the man that was by the pool of Bethesda or the grain incident happened. This is on another subsequent Sabbath, probably located from a time perspective close to the other two. And it says he entered the synagogue and was teaching. So he's not just going there in the synagogue, he's going there teaching, because remember, Christ, we've seen previous to this, when he goes in the synagogue, he's always preaching. And what is he preaching? What's the content of his preaching? It is what? The coming of the kingdom. The kingdom of God is at hand. The messianic kingdom is here. And I am the promised Messiah who's going to rule and reign over the kingdom. That is the good news. If you believe this, and if you accept me as the Messiah, the kingdom of God is at hand, right? That's what he's preaching. Now, he's not preaching the good news of his death and resurrection, because that hasn't occurred yet. Okay, so what he's preaching here is the fact that he is the Messiah, come to fulfill the Old Testament prophecies about the coming kingdom. All right. It says he was teaching, and Luke mentions that it wasn't just his hand, but it was his right hand. Okay, so we'll get into that here in just a moment. But if you just think about the right hand is really significant, right? Why is right hand significant? What might be some reasons that the right hand is significant? Okay, most people, okay, the answer, most people are right-handed. That is true. So to have your right hand be withered means that potentially, if this person was right-handed, that would put him at a serious disadvantage, right? He might have been left-handed though. Possible, but you're right. He did. He had to be left-handed whether he liked it or not.
Right hand speaks power.
Yes. That's yes. Say that again.
Right hand speaks in power.
Yes. Okay. So there is some symbolism here in the fact that it's his right hand. That the right hand not only probably represents what most people's dominance is, but right hand is very significant because that is power. If you were visiting a king and you were another king, they would sit you at their right hand, which at the right hand means you are the same level and status. So someone that was sat at the king's right hand was at the same power and authority. That's really why when Christ sits down at the what hand of the Father?
Right hand.
The right hand of the Father. Like that's not just a junior position. At the right hand means you are on equal footing as the person you're sitting next to. So there is something where Luke says it's his right hand. Now, obviously, physically it's his right hand, but there's also some connotation about the power or the powerlessness that this man must have felt because of that. All right. Now it says it's his right hand. And it says, and the scribes and the Pharisees, right? So now we get who it is, right? So we don't get the Pharisees until like verse 14 down here in Matthew, Mark, but it says the scribes and the Pharisees. So just a quick reminder. The scribes are what group? What group do they belong to? The scribes, what group do they belong to? Nope, they're not Levites. That would be that's the Sadducees. The Levites would be priests and they would be Sadducees. Pharisees. Okay. So the scribes and Pharisees are the same group. Now, what's the difference? And I just want to make sure, because we start to again get these people get brought into it. The Pharisees were the general part of the Pharisaic group, and they were, required to have the Torah, memorized. But the scribes were a specific subgroup within the Pharisees. The scribes are actually the lawyers. They were the ones that not only had the Old Testament memorized, but they had all of these oral traditions memorized as well. And they were the lawyers that would be able to pass judgment on whether or not someone had broken one of these oral traditions. So they're like the uber Pharisee. Does that make sense? And they're the smart ones. Like, you don't get to be a scribe if you can't memorize vast amounts of information. To the point, I mean, none of us have memorized as much as these guys have. Super smart. So you have the Pharisees, but you have their legal arm, so to speak, the scribes, that are also part of this. So these two groups are brought in, and Luke mentions that both of them. Now, Luke says this. Luke says, but he knew their thoughts. And I'm going to come back to this because there is a problem. If you're reading it only from Matthew's perspective, you might think the situation happened one way. But if you read it from Mark and Luke's perspective, you realize that something else is going on. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But Luke adds, but he knew their thoughts, right? And it also says, and he rose. He told the man to come and stand here, and the man came and rose and stood in front of Jesus. So we get that extra from Luke. And then after looking around at all of them, then he said, stretch out your hand. And it says that they were filled with fury. And that is the word there. We're going to get into that in just a moment about what that actually means. So putting all this together, this is then this incident of the man with the withered hand in the synagogue. All right. Okay. So, like I said, this is the third Sabbath controversy that we've had. Yes, Mike, sorry.
I didn't have a question. I was just going to make a comment that on Luke 6:1-5 from last week, he said one Sabbath day as Jesus was walking, and then the very next verses is on another Sabbath day. So he made the distinction between the
That's
two.
right. And that's why the first two are likely on the same Sabbath, and this one is a subsequent one. Yeah. Because Luke's a historian too. So he's actually more, the reason why, Luke wanted to put his stuff in order, and he's a historian. So he's more concerned about letting you know that it's an additional one, not the same one. Whereas the other ones, they don't really care. Okay. Now this is the third Sabbath one. And it says that he had the man with a withered hand. And this is, it's deformed, likely shrunk. Now, you probably have sometime in your life seen someone who either has one or both arms, that there's really nothing here but a stub and maybe a hand with fingers on it, right? It's just there. That's likely what is talking about here. Not that his hand is necessarily like deformed like this, but it's withered. It's the idea that it's shrunken. So likely he's got one good arm and he's got another one that is just an appendage here that you really can't do anything with, right? And particularly back in an agrarian society, that puts you at an extreme disadvantage because it's hard to work with one arm. Like I had an uncle who was a dairy farmer, and he had one arm. That's not easy. Feeding cows and hucking bales of hay and that kind of stuff, but and he had one of those little mechanical arms. I doubt this guy had any kind of a mechanical arm to help him out. So he's got this hand that is deformed and shrunk. Now, again, here's the point. This is not a life-threatening issue. So remember from last week, the Pharisees would allow you to help somebody out if it was life-threatening to the animal, like an animal, or to a person. So if you had to save something like drowning and you had to jump in a river and swim out there and go, pull them out, otherwise they're going to drown, that was okay. But it had to be life-threatening. Well, in this case, this guy is not life-threatening, right? It's maybe prohibitive in a lot of ways, but the guy's not going to die. So he could have waited until Sunday to take care of this guy's arm. Okay, that's the other thing to keep in mind. Okay, now it is very likely that this man was brought into the synagogue by the scribes and Pharisees as a plant. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. And the reason why we know that is because it says that the scribes and Pharisees were watching Jesus closely, right? There's a man with a withered hand, and they're watching him closely. So the connection in the text is explicit. There's a man with a withered hand, and they're watching him closely to see what he will do. Now, the word there that you have, this term, Greek term, it means to spy. It means to peep. It means to sort of like in a voyeur sense, like you are trying to. There's a deceitfulness of what they're doing. Like they're not just like, oh, there's a guy with a withered hand. I wonder what he's going to do. I mean, the term there is very graphic. That means that this guy's there, and they're all sitting there, and they want him to heal because they want to be able to accuse him of breaking their law. So the fact is this guy is almost 100% for sure a plant by the Pharisees and the scribes, right? And they were watching to see what he would do on the Sabbath. So keep that in mind, all right? Because here's the important thing. At this point in the ministry of Christ, he heals indiscriminately. In other words, he does not require faith on the part of the person, right? Doesn't require faith. We've seen him where he doesn't require faith. Sometimes people express faith, sometimes they don't. He doesn't even require that the person's righteous. Like he heals everybody. We're going to see in the next section we get to, everyone that comes, he heals. Like it doesn't matter who you are. So at this point in his ministry, righteousness is not required and faith is not required to be healed. So this guy being a plant by them does not prohibit Christ from healing the object that's going to be used against him and that he's going to be accused by. Does that make sense? Right? So he's, he's going to go ahead and do that. All right. Now, notice what it says here. We've got an issue, right? Because Matthew says that there's a man with a withered hand, and they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? All right. So that sounds like they're asking a verbal question, right? Doesn't it sound like this, the scribes and Pharisees are asking him? Okay. But Luke says, and the scribes and Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath so that they might find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their what? Their thoughts. And he said to the man with the withered hand, come and stand here. And he rose and stood there.
That steam coming out their ears, their eyes were cross-eyed because they wanted to kill him.
Are you saying he doesn't have to be omniscient to yeah, you can see hatred. Yeah. Well, okay. So what is how did this actually happen? Well, the way it happens is the way that Luke described it, which is the fact that they're not verbalizing this, but they are actually in their heart saying it. This is the same type of language and situation that happened. Remember, when the man is brought into the house, remember all the Pharisees and stuff are in the house. No one can get in there. The man is crippled. And so his friends bring him, his four friends bring him. They have to go up on the top of the roof of the house. They have to take off the tiles and they lower him down. And it says in that same situation that he knew their thoughts, right?
That was just an observation stage too.
Well, and this is still just the observation stage.
Just here, this is
No, this is still the observation stage.
this is during the interrogation stage.
Well, we'll see here. We'll see here. Yeah. Anyway, so it says here that he knew their thoughts, right? So the way it happened is that the most likely. Now there's another option. The way that it happened is that Luke records what they were actually thinking, but Jesus knew their thoughts, and so knowing their thoughts, he then replies to the unasked question. And Matthew just says they were asking him. In other words, this was what they were thinking in their hearts. Now, it is possible that Christ knew their thoughts and then they verbalized it after that, although that's not exactly the order that the text says, right? Okay. So what we see here now then is that he understands what's going on, and that they're saying, the reason why they're saying this in their hearts is because they're still observing him, right? They haven't made a public declaration about who he is, stage of observation. And we'll get into that here, Mike. I'll go check that out. Now, what does Jesus say? So Jesus knows what they're thinking in their heart, right? And so he's going to again challenge them, right? Just like he's done in the past. And this is what last time, what did he challenge them with? Eating on eating the grain. He challenged them up with, he asked them the story of what? David, right? How do you justify David, right? Okay. He said, how do you justify the priests that have to work on the Sabbath, right? How do you justify? Yeah. So he went back and did it in the same way. He's going to ask him to do this here. And this is what he says. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So they might accuse him. And this is his response. Which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Now, what he's saying here is he's saying something that they already believe. In other words, from Pharisaic law, if you have a sheep that has fallen into a pit and it's going to die because it can't get out, there's no food, there's no water for it, on the Sabbath, you're allowed to do that, right? And so he says, look, you already believe that it's okay to do that, right? Now, the second question that he asked there is, what's more valuable than a man or sheep? Man, of course. Yeah, the obvious answer is the man. The man is much more valuable than the sheep. So logically then, if it's good to do, if it's righteous and holy to do good to a sheep on the Sabbath, which is the lesser good, then of course healing a person is a greater good, and it's permissible on the Sabbath, right? And again, remember, God didn't say you couldn't heal on the Sabbath. He only said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So he's now, the example that he's given here, he's not trying to justify himself against the Mosaic law. The Mosaic law only had one law. He's trying to justify himself using their own laws against them, because this is what they said was permissible on the Sabbath regarding a sheep that had fallen into a pit. So he's now using their own logic, laws, and reasons against them to make his point. That all make sense? Now, what he's really pointing out there is he's pointing out this kind of point of principle, which is this, is that works of necessity and mercy are acceptable on the Sabbath, right? Because remember, last week, what did he say? He quoted what? Hosea 6:6, right? God desires what? You got it.
He desires not sacrifice, but forgiveness.
Mercy.
Mercy.
He desires mercy, right?
I show mercy, not offer sacrifices.
That's right.
For the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath.
That's right. So he is just, in the previous example, he's already made this principle explicit. God wants mercy, not your sacrifices, right? And they want it to be that they're not acting in a merciful way at all, which is why he's going to become really incensed here. Okay, so he's just stating the principle that God has already stated back in Hosea. Now, God's already stated this remember when Christ, well, not remember because we haven't got to it yet. When the teacher of the law asked Christ, what is the greatest law? How does Christ respond? What is his response?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and keep holy the Sabbath.
And then he said also he added,
second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself.
that's right. The second is like it, love you. So in other words, what God has said in the Old Testament already is that if you want to know, and Christ says, and the entirety of the law hinges on those two things: love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as your. And second one, love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else hinges on those two. Christ is pointing out the principle over and over again that if you don't understand that, you don't understand God. This is just an example of that. How do you show mercy? How do you love your neighbor as yourself? you heal them. If you have the means and method to be able to make somebody well, and you would want to be healed as well, who would want to sit there and not be healed? So if you would want to be healed, why would you not heal somebody else? Because that's how God's asked you to act. So when Christ is basically summing this up in this principle, that's what he's saying. You've gotten stuck over here in your laws and you don't even know God. Because the love of God is what? He's already said this earlier. The love of the Father is not what? It's not in you. God's love is not in them. They love their laws, but they don't love God. Because if they loved God, they would understand this principle as a means of operation. All right? Now it says, but they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. Okay, so again, they're silent. He's just asking this question. Here's the interesting thing about Christ. When they ask him a question, he usually asks them a question back. This is actually a very Jewish way, by the way. I mean, the Jews do this all the time. It's a very common way of Jews conversing and particularly arguing with each other. The problem is that whenever he responds back to them, they think that they've got him, right? And when he responds back, his argument is so clear, it's so logically consistent, they don't say anything back to him. Right? We're going to watch this over and over again, where he just knocks the wind out of them. He cuts them off at the knees, because guess what? He's telling them what their own law says. How are you going to argue with that? What are you going to do? You're going to tell me that your own law is not okay? You're telling me that, what are you going to say? That it's not okay to get a sheep out of a pit? Well, if you say that, then you're actually going against your own law. Are you going to say that a man is worth less than a sheep? You're not going to do that, right? I mean, there's no way out of the conundrum here. He's used their own laws and logic against them. And so guess what? Instead of trying to answer him back and looking foolish, they take the only route possible, which is shut up. They can't answer him.
They also said that if it's life threatening, then it's okay. But if it's not life threatening, put it off for a few hours.
Yes. But what he's saying here is that, look, if you've said that it's okay to do good on the Sabbath, in this case, a sheep, you should be able to do that for a person as well.
Because a sheep is not basically, right?
Well, if it falls in, yeah, it is life threatening, because if you get an animal and they fall in a pit, likely that animal is either going to have something maybe broken, they can't get water, they can't get food, right? They're stuck there, and it may survive. But the idea is you don't just leave an animal to struggle in a pit until the next day.
I've actually experienced something.
You left an animal in a pit?
We dug wells to claim groundwater to pump into a terminal water ski lake. And a calf from a neighboring farmer jumped the fence, got through the fence, and found our hole, and was down there a good 12 feet plus. So we had to go locate the farmer and have them come and get their cow. I have no idea how long it may have been in there.
But what you didn't do is just say, well, I guess we'll just wait till tomorrow and fix it, right? I mean,
I think it was on a Sunday, to be honest.
well, this was on the Sabbath. Sabbath's not Sunday. Remember, we talked about that last week. Yeah, maybe it was a Saturday. All right. So anyway, so just kind of keep that in mind here, is that when he asked them the question, as is typical in their conversations, they don't have a response. Because as God, you don't get smarter than God. Like, God doesn't get fooled by questions. He knows all the answers, right? So, I mean, when you watch this, you get this perception that Christ is the smartest man in the room, because he is. He's God. Now it says, but they were silent. Of course they're silent, because they know if they say anything, everyone's going to look around them and think they're stupid. So the best way to not remember, even a fool appears wise when what? This is what the Bible says. Well, it's not 1 Corinthians. Yes, right. Even a fool appears wise when he keeps his mouth shut. Right? So if you realize you're God, best thing to do is to keep your mouth shut, because as soon as you open it up, you're going to be a fool, and they don't want to do it. So anyway, they were silent. No, Not. Okay, it says, and he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, right? And said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out and his hand was restored, right? Now, again, we've already kind of talked about why they remained silent here. It says that Jesus, first of all, that he looked around at them. So before he actually does the healing, he's asked this question, they haven't answered, and you can tell he's like the teacher that is probably looking at his students and being like, I've asked you what 2 + 2 is, and none of you are raising your hand. I mean, he's given them the look. I don't know if you know, like your mom might have given you a look when you were a kid or whatever else, and you get that look. That's the look he's given them. Like, I've given you a question, none of you are answering, and guess what? You all know what the right response is. You know what the right response is, but you won't say it. So he's looking around, he's giving them this look, and while he's looking at them, he is angry. So this is one of several places that we see Christ exhibiting righteous anger. It's not that anger is not wrong. In fact, if you don't get angry at injustice and unrighteousness, then something's wrong with you. Does that make sense? If you're not angry when a child gets abducted or someone gets, murdered, or you know what I'm talking about? If you're not angry at injustice and unrighteousness, then something's wrong, right? Anger points to the fact that something's wrong. What you do with your anger is a different story. That's why the scripture says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Meaning, don't let the righteous anger fester where then it becomes unrighteous because of how it impacts you and your living and things like that. But being angry in and of itself is not wrong. Yes, Mike.
It says this is the only explicit reference to Jesus's anger in the First Testament or the New Testament.
Yeah, the other ones are inferences from him when he cleansed the temple twice.
Okay, so
And in
it did say he didn't have anger then. He wasn't. It was just an inference.
No, it doesn't say it. That's what they're saying. The use of the word anger, that's the explicit, but it's explicit in his actions. It's not explicit in the wording of the text.
Literally.
Yeah. That's what it's saying. Yeah. Well, it's the only one that says he was angry, right?
He looked at them
angrily, yeah. Yep. Now this again, this idea of this looking around, again, it's that penetrating look. So it's that one word, I mean, you just duck your head when that person's looking at you because you know that you're in deep trouble. And again, looks at them with anger. So this anger, I don't know why this is high. It should say his. I mean, he's incensed. He's looking at them because what they have just said is, how dare you make this man well? How dare you restore this man to a level of health that God designed to do that? I mean, that's what they're saying. Like, how dare you do good? How dare you do God's work of restoration? And so he's just like, you guys are you're off your rockers, right? So that's where his anger is coming from. But it also says he was grieved. In other words, this is this idea of, again, this is a very emotive word that is representative of this idea of like deep sorrow. Like, you're angry, but at the same time, it cuts him. Like, Jesus isn't just standing there and saying, all right, well, I know you don't agree with me, and then you do want to be healed, and you stretch your hand out and whatever else. He is right now, his emotions are high. He is deeply sad. In fact, we'll see this word used of Christ a few other times, right? This deep emotional sorrow. And why? It's because of how obstinate, how insensitive could you possibly be to take umbrage with making someone better, with making someone whole? How morally lack of, I guess, how lack of moral conviction can you have when you do not desire someone to be healed, right? That's what he's going with right here. And again, this goes back to this hardness of their heart. Now, this hardening is the same type of word, Greek word that's used in Romans of hardening, right? And in Ephesians, it's this fact that it's impenetrable. Like your hearts are so hard that nothing's going to penetrate that, right? Nothing that Jesus says and nothing that Jesus does is going to break through that. These individuals have hardened their hearts, right? And that's the problem that he's dealing with here is you are so hard that you cannot love people and you cannot see the truth of what has actually occurred. Now, he says, stretch out your hand, right? Now, Luke tells us that he told him to come to him and the man came to him, stretched out his hand, and it was restored. Now, this must have been something fairly significant because, again, if his arm is one of those is shriveled like it appears to be from the text, that means his arm just like Stretch Armstrong, man, that thing just like went right out there and it was fully restored. And this may have been, if this was a birth defect, because likely it was, because it's not like his arm got chopped off, right? It doesn't appear that way. Like this guy has probably not had a working arm since birth. So imagine what that would mean to you to have the Messiah restore you to full health. And yet these guys are over here just like burning. How dare you? How dare you make this man's? I mean, do you get the silliness of it?
Ray was saying they're good vipers.
No, totally. Yeah, I mean, how vile do you have to be upset about something like that? Anyway, all right. So it says here, he says this, and he says, stretch out your hand, and man stretched out, and it was restored healthy like the other. Again, so that tells us now that it's the same length and same functionality. It's healthy just like that. Now, interesting enough that Jesus doesn't actually touch him, all right? Which is important because we've talked about this before. Remember when we had earlier, when Jesus was up in Cana of Galilee, all he had to do is he said, hey, look, your son's healed. And the man went back. It's just Jesus can heal from a distance, right? And so this is important because he doesn't actually have to touch the man. In other words, his power to heal and to restore and to create comes from the word of his mouth, which harkens us back to Genesis, where God spoke and the world's created. Right? And you're going to see that with Christ throughout, that sometimes he touches, but there's many times he does miracles just by his command. In other words, he can command in the same way that God himself commands to either heal or to create. All right. Now, I already kind of mentioned this here, is that it doesn't require faith, because this man was, I think, obviously a plant. Now, he did get up and walk over to Jesus. That's not necessarily a demonstration of faith. But at this point, that it's not required. There will be a point when his messiahship is officially rejected, where Christ will only heal based off of faith. Right? So this will change. But for now, he's going to heal everybody that comes to him. And the reason for that is that at this point, the reason for his healings is to authenticate his messiahship. There will become a point when the nation has rejected his messiahship where he's going to be like, no, okay, now I will do healings based off the need and the faith of the individual coming to me. I'm no longer doing it to demonstrate I'm the Messiah. I've already done that. I've already demonstrated to you, and you have, as a nation, rejected me. All right. Now, what is the response that they have to this? Well, Luke says they were filled with fury, like this rage. We'll get into that here in just a moment. It says, Matthew says that they conspired. Again, the word that's used there, it's not that they just went out and discussed, but conspire has a very negative connotation. Does everyone understand that? That the Greek word that's there is that it is an underhanded way of finding whatever means possible to destroy someone, right? And they'll make up lies about him. They will have false accusations against them. So this conspiring is, we don't care. In other words, the end, killing him, justifies the means. So this is a conspiring against him in a way that has negative, sinful overtones in how they're going to go about it. Okay. And then, like I said, it does say that they held counsel with the Herodians. Now, notice Matthew says, and also Mark, that they're going to, their object is to destroy him. So this word that we have here, apolumi, is that has a very distinct meaning when it applies to people versus when it applies to objects. Okay, we'll get to that. All right. Now, when it says in Luke that they were filled with fury, the word there that's used means that they are so filled. Remember when Paul says that we are to be filled with the what? The Spirit. What he means is we are to be controlled by the Spirit, right? So in the same structure, Greek structure, these people were controlled by their fury. In the fury, there is an intense anger. And because they're filled with it, what it means is they're literally out of their minds with anger. They are no longer thinking with their prefrontal cortex. Does everyone know what I mean by that? Like, this is nothing but an animalistic response to their anger. They're out of control. And because of that, then they have an object, which is to destroy him. Now, this tells you what anger does. This tells you how far they have fallen, because they then go out and they conspire with the Herodians. Now, who are the Herodians? Anyone know who the Herodians are?
People of Herod.
The
supporters of Herod.
Supporters of Herod. Now, remember, Herod wasn't a Jew. Herod was he was Idumean, an Edomite. He's not a Jew, but he was selected by Rome to rule. And the Jews, other than Herodians, thought that it was that this was an illegal situation, that Rome as occupiers, Rome as conquerors, had placed someone in power that was not a legitimate ruler. So if you're anyone but the Herodians, you did not recognize the legitimacy of the rule of Herod. Now, you recognized it because he's got the power to send soldiers after you and kill you, right? I mean, you recognize it that way. But he was not recognized as legitimate except by the Herodians. The Herodians say, hey, look, as long as the rule comes from the house of Herod, and Herod had Jewish connections, right? So there's a Jewish Edomite connection that was there. And Herod, not Herod the Great, this is one of his sons, he was not well liked by the Jews, but it was better than the Romans, right? So there were some ways in which he was better than the alternative, which is actually have a Roman in place. So the Herodians said, as long as you haven't come through here, and Herod respects our Jewish laws and allows us to sort of regulate ourselves to a great degree, other than capital punishment, allows us to sort of live our lives, then we're fine with that. That was the Herodians' perspective. So they actually were against any attempts to overthrow Rome. They were against any attempts to oust the house of Herod. They were against all of the people that were trying to clamor against the rule of Herod. Now, the rest of the Jews, particularly if you've got the zealots over on the far, so the zealots are like on the far right-hand side. They're the ones that would go around and try to kill the Romans. They'd find you in a dark alley and they'd stab you to death, right? And so you had one side that was completely militaristic against the rule of Rome, and through Herod, that rule. And then you have these Herodians. So what you have here then is you have the Pharisees who are on this far right-hand side, who don't believe in the legitimacy of the house of Herod, who will do, they will allow you to do things even if it would be sinful, like to, we talked about taxes. They found ways of justifying not paying taxes or cheating on your taxes because they didn't recognize the legitimacy of the rule of Rome. So you've got on one side these Pharisees, and then within them a group of people, these zealots who are actually militaristic. And yet what you see here is after this event, these Pharisees who are on one side of the fence that want Rome gone as quickly as possible, go out and conspire with their bitter political enemies, the Herodians. Now that's some bedfellows. Only Jesus can make people do that. But no, you think about, I mean, if you just think of our political spectrum here, like you're talking whatever people or groups you associate with like far left, whatever you want to do that. And then whatever you think of the far right, like these people can barely even be in the same building with each other. That's what you've got here. And yet they're sitting down with a one goal, which is to have Christ destroyed.
That's like the same with Matthew and Simon and Zealot, right?
Yep.
Because they had that same type of relationship. My question is Herod that we're talking about here. This is the same guy who fell in love with his brother's wife and married her. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is Herod Antipas, not Herod Philip. Herod Philip was up in the Galilee area. This would be Herod Antipas, who was the Judea.
He married.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, which is why John the Baptist is going to get killed shortly. Yeah, we haven't got there yet. He's going to get killed. All right. Now, here's what Arnold said. Here's what Arnold says about this. He says the Herodians, whose focus was politics, stood outside the current of religious life, except so far as their Hellenizing tendencies and worldly interests led them to show an ostentatious disregard for the Mosaic law, right? In fact, they went out of their way to obliterate any notion or symbol of their Jewish identity. Now, so you've got these Herodians who, because of the Greek Hellenizing influence, there were some Jews that said, hey, look, we like how these Greeks live. Like they liked it. They liked all the pomp and circumstance. They liked all the immorality that came with the Greeks. They liked the Greek games. They liked all of this stuff. And so these Jews were thoroughly Hellenized, which is why they would be in line with the Herodians. They really had sort of given up their Jewish identity because for expediency, for what they could get out of it. And that's what he's saying right here is you've got the Herodians on one side that try to do everything they could to sort of throw off their Jewishness. And then you have the Pharisees whose ultimate goal was to identify as much as they could as a Jew in the Mosaic law, right? So this makes the Pharisees' willingness to partner with them even more absurd and proves the extreme virulence or hatred with which Jesus has inspired them. All right, so these groups get together. Now, what is their point? Their point is what? How to what? Destroy. That's right. So the Greek word that is there, polemy, means to kill. When it is applied to people, it means to kill. So this is not talking about destroying his reputation. This isn't trying to talk about destroying his family business or anything like that. When it's applied to people, it means kill. Right? Death, slay, destroy. When it applies, of course, to objects, because the same word can be applied to objects, it means, of course, you can't kill a table, you can't kill a wineskin, you can't kill anything like that. It just means to completely render it useless. And most of the time it refers to like a destruction, like a wall that is torn down and obliterated into nothing but, you know, pebbles and sand type of thing. So their aim is to destroy or to utterly destroy him by killing him to make him perish, right? That's their whole end of what they have is to kill. All right. So now we've got the end of the Sabbath controversies. Now we've got this big conspiracy that's going on between the Herodians and Pharisees, and they now are figuring out how in the world can we kill this guy? Because every time we try to pull something on him, he always brings something else up and it makes us look like fools, right? So we got to get rid of this guy. Now, we're going to finish this last section here of his authority to heal. And we're still in the same section here, this authority to heal. And then we will get out of that next week with the choosing of the 12. So after this, after it says that the Pharisees and the Herodians decided to go off and to conspire against Christ, Matthew says this. Now, notice Matthew and Mark's account, it's the same account, but it's remarkably different. Now, I don't mean contradictory, I just mean different. So Matthew chapter 12, verses 15 to 21, it's the next verses. It says, Jesus, aware of this, aware of what? When it says, Jesus, aware of this. That's right. That's right. Jesus, aware of the fact that they had gone off and conspired with the Herodians in order to kill him, aware of this fact, he withdrew from there, right? So now Jesus leaves. And many followed him, and he healed them what? All. And he ordered them not to make him known. Now, this is interesting because from Matthew's account, it sounds like he's telling the people he healed not to make it known, but that's actually not what's happened. This is why reading the gospel accounts side by side is important, because Mark actually tells us who those instructions were to, and it wasn't to the people that he healed, right? Because this is what Mark says. Jesus withdrew from with his disciples to the sea. This would be the Sea of Galilee. And a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea and from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him, and he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. Okay, so from Mark's account, we understand that the them does not refer to the people that are healed, but it refers to the reaction of these unclean spirits that were there witnessing this great healing event of Christ. Okay. With that said, how do we sort of wrap up this healing ministry before we get into the selection of the 12 by Christ? Well, Mark points out, if you read Mark's account, there's three basic things that he points out. Number one, that the fame of Jesus continues to grow. And so he lists the fact that, his fame is growing so much that people are coming from outside the land, right? So he lists a whole bunch of, you go back here, he says Galilee and Judea, that's all in Israel, and Jerusalem, that's in Israel. But then he mentions Idumea, which is Edom, that's south of Judah. And from beyond the Jordan, that would also be outside the land.
It says here east of the Jordan, so that would
Yep.
be like Syria, Jordan.
Well, Syria would have been up north, but that would have been that's east, that's outside of the land of Israel at that time. Yeah, and from around Tyre and Sidon. Again, Tyre, Sidon, the part that is beyond the Jordan to the east, and Idumea, those are all Gentile lands. So his fame is growing so much. It's not just Jews. I mean, remember, Capernaum was on the road, the Via Maris. It was on that main trade route. So as Gentiles would come through the land of Israel, they're hearing about this guy named Christ. And as they take it back to their towns, people are starting to come from all around, not just Jews, but Gentiles, because there's a man here that can heal. And so that's what's going on in this particular situation. Yeah, but
Edomites were not Jews, is that correct?
no, Edomites were not Jews.
They were from the family of.
They were from, so yeah, you've got Esau. Esau.
Who's the other one?
Yeah. So what you have is that they're cousins, and in fact, remember, as the Jewish people are coming out of the slavery at the Exodus, Edomites won't let them pass. And they give them problems. They won't provide them the courtesy, and so God provides a special judgment on them because he's like, well, this is like your cousins, and this is your kinsmen. Like, they're not Jews, but they're as close to as you can get, right? Because they are Jacob and Esau. Jacob is a Jew and Esau is not, right? But that's where you get this from. So you've got these Idumeans. So that's the reason why through Herod, they're kind of a cousin, they're a close cousin to the Jews, but they're not Jews. Does that make sense? To be a Jew, you have to be a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah. Because Downline from Jacob, yes, which the Idumeans were not, right? They were from Esau. All right. So number one, his fame spread is in his miracles because of his miracles, right? The second thing is that it describes the fact that the crowds are so massive that Christ has to take serious steps in order to stop from being crushed, right? The word that we have here is it says in verse 9 of Mark, and he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because why? Not because he just wanted to go out in a boat, not because he thought it would be a great platform to preach from, but why? Because of the crowds. It says, lest they crush him. So just imagine this throng of people that he's doing miraculous things. His fame is spreading, and because of that, he can't even walk without being crushed by the crowds, right? And it says, for he'd healed many so that what? All who had diseases pressed around him to do what? Just like the lady. Like it became known that all you have to do is touch him. He doesn't even have to look at you. He doesn't even have to recognize you. Like the guy's just, if he's walking someplace, just reach up and like tag, like, this is the game of tag, right? Just go up there and tag, you're it, right? All you have to do is touch him and you're going to be healed because the healing flows out of him, right?
That's really a big deal because as time goes on, it's only by our faith
That's right.
that he honors us.
That's
And
right.
so when you said that earlier, I went back here to Hebrews 11:6, and it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's going to be faith.
Yes.
Is going to be the basis by which he heals after he's officially rejected,
So
right?
this is a big deal. People
It is.
not to show up and boom, they were healed.
And it says he healed all of them. Like he's probably over here, like, remember the crowds are crowding in on him. So there's not a little line here. It's not like he's sitting up on a chair someplace and they're just like this nice little line and people like coming up and he's like Santa Claus, hey, sit on my lap and tell me what's wrong and, I'll heal you. I mean, they're just crowding in on him. And I imagine he's like touching them and whoever he touches is getting healed. And then people are touching him from the backside. I mean, this is what's going on. So imagine the power flows out of him. Why? Because he's God. He's not a magic man. He's not he's not like the Pharisees or whatever else. This individual is unique. The power to heal and create and restore, which is the work of the Messiah, is restoration, flows out of who he is. All right. The other thing it says is, oh boy, I should spell check this, but unfortunately, I'm running a little late today. Thank you. It says demons continue to, the third thing is that they continue to recognize his authority. So whenever you see the demons interact with Christ, they immediately understand who he is and they proclaim it, which is kind of weird. Like it's weird from a couple different perspectives. Number one, they clearly know who he is and they recognize him, and the Pharisees and scribes should have done the same thing. What he was doing was obvious, and yet they, out of their own hatred for him because of what he's done, they can't see what's as plain as the nose on your face. And yet demons who are even more opposed to Christ can do nothing but what? Recognize who he is, well, and give him the honor he's due. I mean, you're talking about those who have rebelled in the angelic world against Christ, and yet whenever he is in their presence, that's what you see them doing. Either leave us and they recognize who he is, or proclaiming that this is in fact who they are. They never deny that he is God. They never deny who he is. That makes sense? Like they recognize that, okay? I think that's important, right? So that's the third thing that Mark points out from his account. Now, Matthew gives us something else here, right? Now, if you remember, it says this. Matthew says, this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. Now, here's the interesting point. We get several times within the gospel accounts the idea of the Trinity. And this is one of those. We get explicitly at his baptism and at his transfiguration, the declaration of the Trinity. But here we get the fact that there's the Trinity. And guess what? This quote is coming from not the New Testament, but what? The Old Testament. That's right. And in fact, the rabbis struggled with the fact that even though they said, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is Ahad, is one, they recognize that there are places in the Old Testament that seem to point out that God was more than their concept, and they didn't know what to do with that. And this is an example here of the idea of this Trinitarian concept in the Old Testament.
So can I ask you real quick? So you're saying that this is an example of the Trinity. So this is the Father speaking through Isaiah.
This is the Father speaking through Isaiah.
Okay, and so he speaks of the Son.
Yep.
Of whom he is well pleased, like he said back in at his baptism, and then he will put the Spirit on him, and so that is the Holy Spirit.
Yep, that's right. So
because it's a capital S, Spirit.
Well, they don't have capitals in they don't have this capitalized in the English version. That's a convention. Yeah, that's our convention. That's not capitalized in the Greek. So we just got to be careful about that. But anyway, so yeah, but Mike, thank you for that. So this is quoting from Isaiah 42, and again it says, "Behold," if you go back to Isaiah 42, "Behold my servant." Okay, well, who's speaking here? God. This is within the sections of Isaiah that are these messianic parts, messianic prophecies of Isaiah. So my servant is Isaiah's favorite way to designate whom? The Messiah. That's Isaiah's favorite. And that's why Mark actually, and many times, picks up on Isaiah, because Isaiah happens to be his favorite prophet to quote from. And Isaiah references the Messiah in this way. They're called the servant passages of Isaiah. So what we have here is we have God saying, my servant, being this case the Messiah, whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. And again, that my soul is well pleased, that aligns with the baptism, where God said that about Christ. This is my son in whom I am what? Well pleased, right? And then I will put my Spirit on him. Well, how did that happen? My Spirit happened when? At his baptism, and it never left him, right? I'll put my Spirit on him. So here you have this Trinitarian concept all the way back in the Old Testament. Now, again, this is also where the rabbi struggled, because they said, wait, how can God be one and then have his Spirit go out from him and rest on somebody else? Because but you see, this is where the rabbi struggled with this idea of there being a multiple persons, let's say, in the Godhead, because of verses like this. Because they said, wait, that doesn't make any sense. If you're God, but then you're saying your Spirit goes out from you to land on somebody else, essentially to be on somebody else, then that means that your Spirit is the same as you, but it's because it's your Spirit, but it's also distinct from you because it's now separate. You get what I'm saying? They struggled a lot with these types of verses. Like, how in the world do we make sense of this idea of God being one? Now, we know how to make sense of it because the Trinitarian concept makes sense of that, right? That's the difference. That makes sense? All right. Anyway, but notice what it says here. He says, I'll put my Spirit on him and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. Well, this is kind of odd because most of the time the Messiah's purpose is for the Jews. But now he's going to proclaim justice to the Gentiles. Well, what does that justice to the Gentiles look like? Now, justice in this case is this idea of righteousness, of things being right. So don't think of this as some sort of a social justice or a legal justice in this case here. This is talking about he's going to proclaim righteousness to the Gentiles. Well, how does his righteousness, how is he proclaiming that to the Gentiles? What's that? Yeah, well, in this case specifically here, how's he doing it? He's doing what? Because Isaiah actually says it, and Matthew says this is a fulfillment what Christ has just done. So Christ, just remember here, let's just back up for a second. Jesus has just healed people, and it's a lot of these are Gentiles that have come from different parts. So Christ has actually healed them. He's restored them to right sense of living, because they are physically, bodily healed. Does that make sense? So he's dispensing righteousness as he is healing these Gentiles. Now notice in the quote from Isaiah, it goes on to say, he will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. And this is key. Now this is, how does he proclaim justice to the Gentiles? A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. So what he's saying here is, how does this proclamation go out to the Gentiles? It's through what? The Gentiles who are in need of restoration, he is going to heal, right? In this case, Matthew's attributing that to the physical healing that's going on. But the overarching idea is not just when we talk about justice and rightness, that doesn't just extend towards the physical body. It is going to extend, and you are correct, both of you are correct, to actual salvation. Because Isaiah also says that the light will go out to the Gentiles, right? Through the Messiah. But Matthew takes this account of Gentiles being healed as a start, a preliminary fulfillment, not an ultimate fulfillment, but a preliminary fulfillment of the Isaiah passage, in that Christ is now ministering and making whole, bringing rightness to the lives of these Gentiles as they come to be healed.
To the Jews first.
The salvation is to the Jews first, yes. Now again, Jews are being healed too here as well. But Matthew's point here in the quoting from Isaiah is that as Christ's fame has spread, the people that are coming to him are now not just Jews, but they're also Gentiles, because the Gentiles are coming and receiving restoration, receiving rightness in who they are through the physical healing. This is the start of that redemptive process. It's not the finish of it, though, because the finish of the redemptive process happens when he what? Dies. He's risen from the dead. Exactly right. But he quotes this as the beginning of that fulfillment. And the reason why he pulls this passage from Isaiah is because of the Gentiles that are now starting to come to him from outside the land, right? There's plenty of Isaiah passages that relate to the benefit of the Messiah towards the Jews. There's much less, that are related towards how the Gentiles will benefit from the coming of Christ. But this is that hint now that, in fact, while Christ has come primarily to the Jewish people, offered himself to them as their Messiah, that his ministry is not only just for them, that the Gentiles will in fact benefit from his coming, right?
Yeah, the NLT says in verse 21, and his name will be the hope of all the world.
Yep. Yeah.
And as opposed to the Gentiles. So, I mean, I understand all the world, but when you think Gentiles, I think of the group of people at the woman at the well, and you think of Samaritans and just the people around there. It's like the whole world. When they say Gentiles, it's everybody.
Well, from a Jewish perspective, there's two groups of people. There's Jews,
us and them.
well, and I don't mean that it's not antagonistic. It's Jewish perspective. There are Jews, and everybody else are Gentiles. Doesn't matter who you are. So the reason why you'll see things like in his name, the Gentiles will hope, or the nations, you see translated nations, is because by calling them Gentiles, it means anyone who's not a Jew. So basically, I don't know, 98, 99% of the world are all Gentiles, right? And that's the whole purpose here, is that in the Messiah, the Gentiles will also find hope. And in the Old Testament, it wasn't clear exactly what that hope looked like. It was really cloudy. But now as we start to see it in the New Testament, we start to see that, guess what? We benefit from that. We're benefactors of this new life.
The Palestinians are benefactors.
Everyone is a benefit. Everyone is able to be saved through grace.
I'd like to be around when Jews finally come to Jesus. I'd like to be around and see.
You wouldn't like to, because I mean, it means you're in the tribulation.
Right, that means, I missed the.
Like, dude, you're in.
It'll be my luck.
Look, you're in some bunk. You're in some cave someplace. You probably haven't eaten in 3 weeks, and you're probably drinking dirty water, and you probably have your clothes are probably all like ripped and torn. You do not want to be there during that time. Like you can watch on YouTube. Like He'll show it to you later on. Like you don't have to be there. Like if you want to see it, you can watch it some other way.
Big screen in the sky.
Yeah, that's not something I would hope for. But anyway, it's okay. All right. Any questions or comments on this? Again, this sort of ends this particular part about the healing, and we'll go to the choosing of the disciples next week.
If you're interested in the attributes of God, in this passage, there are two that are shown: Jesus as God, omniscience, being able to read minds, understand their thoughts, knows all things, and then his omnipotence. He can heal anything or anybody that comes along.
Yep, exactly right. And that's the key of pointing out that he just has to speak. I mean, it's and if you notice how if you were to study kind of how like the Pharisees had ways of healing, but they were concoctions. And in fact, the woman that came to Christ that had been suffering for 12 years, the bleeding issue, she said she went to all the doctors and had tried everything. They could heal, but there's concoctions and there's little incantations and there's things like Christ, when he does stuff, he just says, stretch out your hand, rise up, take up your bed. I mean, the obvious difference between anything they've ever seen done, both in the magnitude of what he does compared to what they're able to do, and then the how he does it, the method he does it, couldn't be more stark. And you're right; those are clear signs that he is God. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Can you explain what the bruised reed and the smoldering wick are?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the figurative language that's here, a bruised reed, and I probably should have mentioned this, is here's a good example. My wife in her backyard, she likes to grow these sunflowers, right? And I was out there and I'm mowing the backyard, and last year I mowed over one of her sunflowers, right? And so this year I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that. But they're planted in a way that there's still about 2 feet of grass behind them, and the way it's planted. And there's a space for the lawnmower in between them. So I'm trying to get all the grass like in between and behind them. So this year I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So I get out there and I'm doing this, and I'm being really careful, and I have an electric lawnmower, right? And so I've got the power cables here. And as I'm going around the first one, and again, this is earlier in the summer when they're only about 2 or 3 feet high. They haven't gotten the big old stalk on them yet. And I'm coming around and whatever else, everything's going great. And all of a sudden she comes running out of the house, and I look, and all I have to do is look at her face. Remember that look I told you about? The look? She's got the look. She had the look, right? And I looked, and what had happened is my power cord had taken, and it had bent it in half.
Oh, yeah.
So then I'm thinking, oh, my natural thought was, I'm just going to have to mow it over, right? Because it's bent in half. Yeah, right. So what we did though is the reed was bruised. right? It's bruised. It was like close to being dead. So I staked it and tied it all up and everything else. And guess what? If that darn thing didn't grow the rest of the summer, it grew at an angle, but the thing still grew. So the idea behind this is that, what does it mean to be a bruised reed in this case, in the context of this?
He's not gonna kill or put out, he's not gonna put it to death. He will make sure that it survives.
That's right. And the people that are coming to, they're coming to him for what? Healing. They've got needs. They're bruised. They're damaged. They need restoration and help. The man with the withered hand has come to him for that. They're bruised. They're not healthy stalks. And what it says here is, hey, look, he's not going to break it. He's not going to be like me, who thought, well, gosh, maybe I'll just mow it over now because I've already bruised it. No, he's going to go over there and he's going to stake it up again. He's going to be like, no. So that's what it's saying here, is that those who are coming to him in need, the Messiah, he's not going to break them. He's going to restore and heal them. That's what he's there for. The wick, you get the idea of a smoldering wick, right? You've got like a candle it's just kind of like, the flame is like, it's right there. It's kind of going out. And like, if you got my kids, like if we put like candles on the table for a nice dinner, you can just out of the corner of your eye, here's what you see. Sorry, this is not good radio. And all of a sudden, like the candle starts to flicker like that. And you're like, what? No, you know what? My kids are over there trying to figure out if they can blow out the candle, right? It's like it's on its last leg here. And instead of covering it and protecting it, he could just say, that's fine. You just reach in there and just put your finger on it and you break it out. And that's all the imagery is saying here is those that are in need, represented by bruised reeds or by wicks, candles that are getting close to dying out. He is not going to quench them. He's not going to put them out. He's not going to break them, because he's there to restore those that are already broken, right? And that's the big difference. The Pharisees don't care a hoot about whether you're broken.
He wants to show mercy.
In fact, they are the ones that want to come and break you. They're the ones that want to come and quench you. So when you see that, that's the imagery of the bruised reed and the smoldering wick. Yeah.
You know, we've been talking about how the Pharisees have showed a bunch of hate towards him, and now they're plotting to kill him.
Yeah.
And again, as I read back through last week's verse, that Jesus says, I want to show you mercy, not offer sacrifices. Well, that in and of itself may have made them mad as well, because they make money off of those sacrifices.
Well, not the Pharisees.
With the money changers and the selling.
Not this
changing
group.
The
No,
animals.
not this group. That's the
Yeah.
Sadducees. In fact, the Pharisees hated the Sadducees, so they would have all been fine with
But
that.
weren't there Sadducees and Pharisees that came from all over to watch him heal the guy at the?
No, it was the Pharisees that did that. And in this case, in this text here, it was Pharisees. It
Just
wasn't
the
the Sadducees. Yeah. Yeah. The Sadducees get brought in on occasions, but mostly what you have dealing with here are Pharisees and scribes as ministry. Sadducees will come in, usually like there's the debate about whether or not there's the resurrection from the dead. So they both hate him, and they want him to answer in a way that's anyway, yes. James.
Being that Jesus was here to fulfill the prophecies and die for our sins, the Pharisees, like when you're talking about the demons believed, but the Pharisees didn't. It's hard to wrap my head around that dynamic, the denial that the Pharisees had. But it seems like since that was the prophecy anyways, that maybe they just were never going to believe no matter what. Jesus did.
Yeah, now the interesting point you bring up is the concept of whether or not there is free will, or whether or not there's a determinism within certain things, right? So I mean, yeah, that's actually kind of what you're pointing to, is because there's a prophecy, since there's a prophecy, are these people determined to take certain actions that they have got no free will to make a decision otherwise? Right? And now that's a big philosophical question that is raised. But I would say that the prophecy in this case is just, it's saying, God knowing the future does not then make the future happen in a determined way. Like God can know what you're going to, in fact, he'll know what you'll do 3 years from now. Now, does that take any responsibility from you doing what you're gonna do 3 years from now? Just because God knows you're gonna go, I don't know, you're gonna go eat a pizza on, October, or November 9th of 2024. Does that mean that you have no free will on next year this time and you go eat the pizza? Does his foreknowledge determine that you've eaten the pizza, or is his foreknowledge indicative that he knows you will, in fact, of your own free will, eat the pizza? Now, I don't want to get into, there's a big philosophical debate, but essentially you've laid out the question or the problem of, since the prophecy says this, did they just have to act that way? And I would say no, because I believe in libertarian free will. I believe in, I take a position called Molinism, which helps to rectify that particular position right there. But I believe, God knew that they were going to reject him. But their rejection is still an individual choice that they have, in fact, made. Now, we could go into the reasons for that. Yeah.
The man with the withered hand.
Yeah.
I don't see that he's right-handed or left-handed in my book here.
Yeah, it's in Luke's account.
It's in what?
Luke's account. It's in Luke's account.
Luke 6.
Luke 6 through 11.
Any other?
To understand all the denial that the Pharisees had.
Yeah.
And so I feel sorry for them,
Yeah, you know what it is though? I mean, the reason why I don't feel sorry for them is because their denial of him is based off of their own ego. Right? In other words, these are the laws that they've created, and how dare you disagree with our laws? So their denial is because purely of hatred, just because of self-interest and egoism, right? Now they actually do believe that their way is the right way. So part of it is their self-righteousness, but it's the fact that how dare you do this? So their anger isn't because they're just wandering around and they just can't get it or can't understand. Now that would deserve compassion when someone cognitively cannot make sense out of a situation, maybe makes a decision A versus B, but they're making that with their full volition, but they're making the decision because they don't like that he has opposed them, and they don't like that he's called himself God. And so theirs is a reaction out of anger and ego, and not out of confusion. Oh, sure. Because look, he's getting so popular here that he can't even walk along the beach without just being crushed to death. So they're totally in fear. In fact, what does it say? You got Caiaphas at the end right before the life of Christ, and what does he say? He says it's expedient for one man to die, then the whole nation perish. And what their fear is this: if we don't stop this now, the Romans are going to come and remove us from our place. They're going to destroy everybody. So if we don't kill this guy, not only do we lose our position, but Israel as a nation, the Jews are going to get wiped out. So they've got not only anger at him, but they're also fearful because he's getting all these people and they're all following him. And they're not just even Jews, got Gentiles that are coming. And all of a sudden, the tight hold that they'd had probably a year before, right? He's probably a year at this point into his ministry, somewhere around there. All of a sudden, within the last year, our whole power structure has just melted away. Right. And yeah, you'd be fearful too. I mean, there would be, think about the Democrats and the Republicans. if all of a sudden there's like some third party that whipped up and all of a sudden everyone is like, they're going to win the presidency and they're going to take over I mean, do you not think that the Republicans and Democrats, do you think they might not get together and try to find a way to not allow a third party to, you know what I'm talking about? Like all of a sudden their whole power structure has dwindled. Yeah, we're on TV, Mike. Don't start.
So next week, we're gonna talk about the 12.
The choosing of the 12. Yep.
And can I say a spoiler alert, something I learned tonight for the first time?
Is it too big of a spoiler alert? Because we really like people to come back for the song on radio. They call it a teaser on radio.
I'm surprised that there were relatives of Jesus involved in that. Other than his brother who came along later. Cousins? James and John, the sons of thunder.
I don't know.
The mother.
Well, then thank you for the non-spoiler alert then, Mike. Appreciate that. All right. Who wants to close anyone want to close in prayer? All right, Mike. Great. Here, hold on. Let me put this here.
Number one, I'm not worthy to do this,
Yes, you are.
but I would like to thank God our Father for his one and only Son that he gave us, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Father, thank you for your Son. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to believe in him, the free will. Help me to be a better Christian and help me to be loving of my neighbors, which I really struggle with. I love your word. I love learning your word. I love the fact that we have somebody in Randy who takes his time from his family, from his job, and prepares for us. Such a special time, special knowledge. I really enjoy what you've allowed us to have here through fun and worship. And in all sincerity, I'm in absolute awe of what you've done through your Son for us. We don't deserve it, but help those who feel so undeserving of your love. Help them truly feel your love and see you through us. Give us the opportunity, give us the power to talk to other people, to talk to them about you, and steer them towards a church that you desire, Lord, that teaches your word and not fake words. Thank you again. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Hey, thank you. Thank you, everyone that's online. Appreciate it.
I'd like to do a public service announcement.